folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a phenomenon or phenomena that seems to be occurring all across the Western world, whether it be the United States, Britain, Australia, and so on. What it is that Chinese income earners and, say, Indian and even subcontinent generally, like Pakistani income earners, when they move to the West, are starting to, and this has been going for a few years now, on average, earning, statistically at least, earning higher incomes than white people. I mean, just looking at one stat I've got, I'm not sure how accurate these stats are, and I'm going to do a bit of a dive into them just to see if we're reading it correctly, or if the statisticians are reading it correctly. But say, and I'll round it off to numbers here. Say the average income for whites is $100. Then there's $118, $119 for Chinese, $111 for Indians, and so on. Whereas black people may be at $77 to the 100 for white people. So there's quite a spread from top to bottom there. Now, some people are saying, well, look, the Chinese do really well at school. Indians sort of aren't that far behind the Chinese in doing well at school. So this is to be expected. They do well in their studies. Therefore, they have better jobs, have higher incomes, they're just better educated and more motivated, and so on and so forth. So, well, again, for someone who's travelled in business as much as I have, I can call bullshit on a lot of that. I've never met Indians who, well, no, I shouldn't say I've met a few, but not very many that I'd rate as industrious or conscientious. Obviously, there's going to be some. Particularly not as you move up the caste system in India. The further up to the top they get, the more they think work is unbecoming to somebody. They're Chinese too. Their wealth must be effortless and must fall upon them, and because life energy and good luck, sort of a part of their wider personal structure, and therefore they're entitled to this wealth and prestige and glory and so on. So the idea of ass-busting hard work, and you'll find some, of course, but the idea of ass-busting hard work is not something they think about or believe that they should have to do in order to make money. So, but coming back to I've already covered the issue that Indians and Chinese and other parts of Asia, Koreans and so on, are Japanese, are very, very good at swatting, and also have large alphabets which sort of exercise the mind in terms of memorizing and retention. If you look at the character sets of, in Japan, for example, you include the entire character set, pictorial and alphabet and the other stuff. It comes nearly 800 characters, for Christ's sake. So they've got to be pretty decent at memorizing, far more so than Western people that have to memorize the practical relationship between what goes on, which is not really part of what the Asian swatting system requires or involves. So anyway, that's the edgy. In terms of swatting for exams, they do pretty well, and they also do a lot of cramming and things like that white people tend not to do. And they also have on a relative basis, at least, more of a photographic memory. But that doesn't really mean much. I mean, cramming and swatting is like, it helps them in getting into things like medicine, I've noticed, where you can't just write an essay on something. It has to be right or wrong. And they also do quite well in mathematics on a relative basis, I've noticed. But anyway, coming back to the income earning, now, China is, other than the jobs and stuff, the investments and so on that the West has made, China's been a basket case for the best part of 500 years. And when this is pre-industrial revolution, the reason the Chinese economy was big was only because they had the largest population, and one worker equaled a unit of production. And when you've got 300 back in the day, 250, 300 million people, whilst England had 3.5 million people, then you're obviously going to produce more than other economies. It's only when industrial automation came up that the Western nations pulled ahead, and places like India and China fell behind. The only reason they had big economies, relatively big economies at the time, again, was because of the large population, not because they were productive or had high output per worker or anything like that. They didn't, far from it. The West was still more productive per worker, but again, a smaller economy because of the smaller population. So coming back again to this idea that Indians and Chinese make more than, on average, allegedly making more than white people. Well, the Indian economy and the Chinese economy are both basket cases. So if the Indians were particularly industrious or entrepreneurial or anything like that, then it would show up in their own countries. And it doesn't. I mean, maybe a few flickers of it here and there in China, definitely not in India. And the corruption and the patronage and the nepotism that goes on, and so no, I don't believe that they're better at making money than white people. So where does the money come from? If indeed it is, as the stats would suggest, on a prima facie basis at least, that Indians and Chinese make more than the average Australian. Now, in Australia, there's a much higher proportion of sick or injured people that aren't earning any income, that are on government benefits, handicapped people, and because there'd be far more of them here, it's Australia, there's more Australians here. So that would drag down the average of what Australians make. If you chop that off the bottom, then you wouldn't see the disparity that you see. If you looked at, say, middle upper management, then you would see whites pull ahead considerably there. So there are certain things you need to look at, whereas a smaller number of Indians are here, and or Chinese for that matter. So on a relative basis, there are more workers as against non-workers on a ratio. So again, you would expect the averages to be higher simply because of that. But there are other reasons. Firstly, a lot of these people who I'll run through just a few examples here to illustrate the point. I've been to a few times to a chiropractic or physiotherapist, but it was a sort of a sports injury thing, and I'd gone there, and there was only white people. And anyway, there was a chain of physiotherapist places, and it got bought out by an Indian investor, and within, oh goodness me, a short space of time, there was no white people at all. It was all Indians were working there. Now, they did some sort of a scam with a franchise. So the Indians who bought into it were allegedly franchising out, but they only franchised out to other Indians. No one else was ever got a franchise. And so because they effectively shut down and reopened as a franchise, they were able to get rid of all the white people they employed, and there was only Indians employed. So quite young Indians there, and they were not particularly impressive. I didn't think they were sufficiently knowledgeable, or they didn't demonstrate that they were committed or conscientious, and so on. So that's how the Indians are given jobs. Would those Indians have got those jobs if they had to apply and compete? I don't think so. I think it's highly unlikely. But that's how that. Another one is a chain that does X-rays and that sort of thing, radiography, and again, an Indian investor bought that chain, and again, other than a few blonde dolly bird receptionists to be eye candy for the Indian boys, all the white people were gone again. It was very quick. within 6 months, the white people were gone, and there was only Indians working there. Some of whom had arrived in Australia at a young age. I could go on here, but that's take out food stores and that sort of thing. They take out food shops, chains. They buy up chains of those, and again employ Indians, or they'll buy hundreds of franchises or rights on hundreds upon hundreds of petrol stations, gas stations, and again only Indians work there. The white people are all gone. So that's how Indians are given jobs. Now, there's also the race and gender quotas in particularly government departments, but also private businesses that are dependent on government revenues. And you see crazy things, and I've seen it around, where a company's looking for a new director of procurement, for example. And there'll be an Indian lady who comes from some rural fucking whatever in India who arrives, and on the day she arrives is given this job as director of procurement in an Australian, ostensibly at least, a private business. And so that in a real world, that wouldn't happen. She's got no first world experience, no experience in the products that company's handling. And anyway, she's the only whatever business experience she's got is from some third world shithole that was a monopoly anyway, owned by her parents. So it's hard to imagine somebody who could be less qualified or less suited for the role. And she's employed over the heads of thousands upon thousands of Australians. But these sort of things are why it's a job paid passably well. So I'm seeing these things frequently, and again, government race and gender quotas. They've got to give a certain amount of jobs to Indians that they wouldn't get. Before the government started putting in race and gender quotas, all the immigrants, Indians, Chinese, they all had to compete against locals. Now, I remember the adverts back at the time saying, if you want this job, you must have exemplary English, verbal and written communication skills. And of course, none of the recent immigrants, maybe a tiny proportion of them, but none of the recent immigrants could compete. Then white people were always getting the job, or the local people were always getting the jobs. Now, it would have changed over time. People coming in at a young age and then growing up, going through school in Australia. So it would have changed over time. But the globalists, the government, the politicians controlled by the globalists wanted quick results, and so they bang quotas, and so people that just couldn't have competed were being given jobs and they were being paid, particularly in the case of the government, being paid the money that would have, that position pays, even though they were nowhere near qualified to be doing the job. So, I've had to at times deal with, say, government authorities where the chief engineer, for example, is a guy and you can barely understand him, and you're going, how the fuck did you get this job? Affirmative action, of course, but in the real world, he wouldn't have got those jobs. So they've been artificially elevated far more quickly than they would have if they had to rely on their own abilities and work experience and qualifications and so on. So it's given them quite a huge leg up that they otherwise wouldn't have had, and that alone would account for many percentage points on the relativity of pay, because the white people aren't getting any sort of leg up like that. So in between the Indians and the Chinese buying businesses and employing only Indians and Chinese, whether it be cleaning companies or whatever. For example, there's a Chinese wholesale company that came out, and they, because of their connections and the way they can put pressure on family back home, pressure on people here, and all that sort of stuff, they insist that certain businesses within an area of Sydney must buy all their things from this supplier. it's not a matter for debate. We're not asking you, we're fucking telling you. And so these businesses all have to buy from that Chinese firm. So what the Indians and the Chinese are also very good at doing is keeping the money within their diaspora. It's not going outside their diaspora. I don't mind if I walk into an Indian shop to buy Indian spices or food or something, condiments and the like. I've got no problem doing that. I mean, someone's got a shop, and hey, that's no problem. I'm okay with the whole thing. But other than what the Indians have to do, they might shop at a national supermarket chain, for example. But anything else that they do outside of things like that, they'll keep within the diaspora. They don't want to spend money outside of it. They've come, as the Chinese have, they've come to take money from the white people, not to share it or to give it. And that comes across certainly in how they do business and who they do business with and so on. So when we look at the different scales, if you like, of pay, I don't doubt actually. Certainly when I look at the majority non-white areas, then I notice as I walk around there, the whites are already an underclass in those areas. Helped, and I think the globalists would delight in that, rejoice and delight in that outcome. And I think it's what they've got in mind for the rest of us. But on these relativity of pay, it's not because the Indians are harder working or brighter or anything like that. Far from it. It's not because they've got they're smarter and more diligent. None of those things. It's because they come in and buy out businesses and employ only Indians and get rid of the white folks, and because of the affirmative action and gender and race quotas that the stupid government does to give these migrants that the country doesn't need a leg up into jobs that they otherwise couldn't get on merit. So when you look at these differences on pay, there are very artificial reasons that it's happening, and none of these reasons have anything to do with merit. And it's very much that the Chinese and Indians in particular have a very strong in-group preference, something that Western governments are failing to comprehend and understand, and they're allowing it to go on into even to the point that there's been some kind of court, but even where Indians that are in procurement, they'll make sure that or Chinese, they'll make sure that the big procurement gigs go to their Chinese or Indian buddies. And sometimes, if it's a bit over, too far over the top, they'll get caught, and particularly if there's under the table payments. But sometimes there isn't under the table payments. Sometimes they're just looking after their diaspora at the expense of white people, and they think we're the stupid ones. Well, if you're letting us do it, then you can't. Why complain? Why cry about it when you're letting us do it? And they've got a point. Also, they're not so much the Chinese, but particularly the Indians or the subcontinent people generally. They have a very childlike concept of wealth. They can't seem to conceive of how you can create new wealth. It just isn't in their heads. They've got a very simple view. White countries are rich, and India and other countries are poor. White countries therefore stole the money from the poor people. I mean, what other reason could there be for the countries being poor? Because they only see it's a set amount of money in the world. It's a fixed amount. So if someone else has got it and you don't, it's because they took it off you. If you have it and they don't, it's because you got it off them. And that's the mentality. It seems insane, but again, childlike and infantile. But that's just how it is. You've been with Tassos today. Your pushback channel. Thank you for this.